short uniform skirt, huh?" he sneered. "Not hiding anything under there, are you?" His hand lifted, grazing the edge of her skirt, as if searching for any excuse to legitimize what he was doing. "Stop!" Amira cried, her voice cracking with panic. Oh, I'm so scared," he mocked, then turned to his partner with a grin. "Who does she think she is?" But moments later, his smirk vanished when he realized her mother was the mayor. If this girl hadn't been the mayor's daughter, would this have stopped in time? The question lingered, sharp and damning. Does justice still mean anything? And what about you? Would you stand for justice or turn away when it matters most? If it were you, would you stay silent or would you stand your ground? The June breeze skimmed the park like thin paper, slipping through grass and fluttering the shirts of kids leaving school late. Amira Monroe sat alone on the third bench, under the shade of an old oak tree. She was 12, with neat twin braids, a uniform skirt past her knees, and a backpack hanging off her right shoulder, like she hadn't fully sat down, just paused between duties. Teachers trusted Amira, who was punctual, calm, and always prepared. But that had never kept her safe. As the daughter of a black mayor in a city where some white neighborhoods still withheld greetings, she knew danger by a different shape. Trained stares, extra questions, backhanded compliments, and those random checks her mother warned her about. If they touch you, ask why. But her mother, Eliza Monroe, never claimed to be strong. She just knew she wasn't allowed to be weak. As the city's first black female mayor, she arrived on time, spoke precisely, and signed quickly. But Amira saw the cost. Nights her mother stayed in the car for minutes before coming in, mornings staring at her reflection in a blank screen. Eliza never let her daughter pay that price. School had just ended. Amira left early to avoid the crowd and came to this park, the place her mother often picked her up on Thursdays. They never said it out loud, but it became a habit. Every time she was late, Eliza would text 3 words, "On my way." Today was the same. She set her phone on her lap, smoothed her skirt, watched the kids playing soccer across the street, the barking dog, and the old man feeding birds. She didn't feel out of place, just small. As she bent to untie her laces, an engine purred nearby. A white and gray patrol car rolled up and stopped just a few meters from her bench. She looked up, quietly, by instinct. The car door opened. 2 young officers stepped out, uniforms neat, sunlight carving sharp lines across their pale faces. One squinted around the park, the other had already seen her. His gaze landed on her. Then he said something Amira couldn't hear, but she saw his lips move, and the other one laugh. She sat up a little straighter. Her backpack was still on her shoulder. The phone screen lit up. Her mother had texted, "On my way." The man looked at her like a misplaced object. "Alone?" he asked, though he wasn't waiting for an answer. His eyes flicked to his partner, the corner of his mouth curling with suggestion. The other caught the signal, gave a small laugh, and shook his head as if joking. "A kid out here? No parents? Might want to check that," he said in a half-joking, half-serious tone that left just enough room to dodge blame if things went too far. The patrol car's engine was still running, the door wide open. The park was nearly empty. The old man feeding pigeons had left, and the kids who'd been playing soccer had moved across the street. The light had tilted, tree shadows growing darker. Amira pulled in slightly, her body instinctively curling, but she tried to keep her voice steady as she saw them walking toward her. "Curfew's not over," the taller one said first. His voice was low and gravelly, not loud but laced with a threat held just beneath the surface. "What are you doing here, kid?" Amira stood slowly, her hand still gripping the backpack strap like it was the only thing anchoring her to the moment. "I'm just waiting for my mom," she replied, clear and polite, eyes avoiding theirs. "Your mom?" The other one laughed, stepping closer. "Letting her daughter sit out here alone at this hour? Doesn't sound right to me." "I have a phone," Amira said softly, still trying to keep calm. "She texted that she's almost here." The shorter officer, with a round face flushed from the sun, leaned in. He stepped too close enough that Amira instinctively pulled back. He didn't stop. His eyes moved slowly from her feet to her head, pausing at each point, as if searching for something to accuse her of, or pretend to. "Short uniform skirt?" he said. "Not hiding anything under there, are you?" Amira froze. Her pulse thudded in her throat. Something stuck behind her chest. She didn't know what to say, couldn't say anything. His hand lifted, brushing the edge of her skirt, as if needing only a reason to justify what he was doing. She stepped back again, but the stone bench behind her stopped her. "Stop!" Amira shouted, her voice cracking in panic. I'm... The sentence never finished. The taller one burst out laughing, loud and sharp, like he'd just heard the funniest joke all day. "Oh, I'm so scared," he said, glancing at his partner. "Who does she think she is?" The other didn't answer, just shoved his hands in his pockets and scanned the park. There were no adults near enough to intervene. The air felt drained of sound. Only the wind rustled the branches, and the officers' laughter stretched thin over the silence, wearing uniforms meant to protect. Then suddenly, the officer in front of Amira reached out. In that split second, she felt her skirt tugged upward, just enough to expose more of her small legs. It was public harassment and humiliation, a crude force, a moment where every boundary was broken with the ease of someone who believed there would never be consequences. Amira snapped, shoving his hand off her body. She didn't know where the strength came from, but her hand trembled as she clutched her skirt. Her breath came fast, her face burned red from shame, from fear. He stepped back half a pace, not to apologize, but to smirk. Arms crossed, eyes full of challenge. "Relax, princess, we're just doing our job." The words cut like salt across an open wound. Amira was scared, but her gaze stayed fixed, defiant, and in that look something made even the officer squint, as if he'd just realized he'd touched something he shouldn't have. His hand clamped down on Amira's shoulder like a steel vise, with none of the basic courtesy adults usually show children. She jerked instinctively, her whole body trembling as if her skin knew something had crossed the line. His other hand yanked at her skirt so roughly that the fabric twisted, the seam at the hem pulling tight with a small, sharp sound. Not everyone would have heard it, but to Amira, it was the sound of something breaking, the safety, the trust, the boundary every child should be entitled to. "Just checking for weapons, princess, relax," he said, dragging out the last words like lines from a bad play. His face no longer looked like a cop, or even a man. It was just power, warped and hungry, testing how far it could go. Amira cried out like a snapped string, her voice fracturing into sobs that didn't form words. The tears came fast and without resistance. She couldn't speak anymore, just the hoarse scream and the broken breath. "Mom! Mom, help me!" The cry wasn't clear or cinematic, but it tore through the false calm hanging over the park that late afternoon. A middle-aged man pushing a stroller paused on the stone path, turned to look, then quickly veered off in another direction. A street vendor under a nearby tree raised her hand to her mouth, eyes wide, but her legs didn't move. No one stepped forward, not a single person. A mother walking her son across the street turned her face the other way. The little boy looked back and tugged on her sleeve. "What's happening, Mommy?" She didn't answer. She just gripped his hand tighter and walked faster. Amira's cries got lost in the breeze, the distant traffic, and the thick silence settling over the park, like a layer of dust no one dared wipe away. A 12-year-old girl, uniform still stiff with starch, was being held in broad daylight in a public space, and people were watching as if it were a scene that didn't belong to them. Amira's eyes scanned the nameless faces. She didn't call out anymore, didn't struggle. She only trembled beneath the hand gripping her shoulder. Her mind stopped thinking about her mother or about anything she had been taught. Only one question echoed. Why won't anyone save me? An old man passed by with a cane, paused for a single second before turning down another path. He looked back, but his eyes were tired, like someone who had seen this too many times to count. In a quiet corner, a phone was discreetly lifted. No flash, just a silent recording, not meant for sharing, but because the person filming knew that girl was someone no one was allowed to touch. And in those few seconds, the entire city seemed to hold its breath, not out of sympathy, but because everyone was waiting to see how far the wrong would go. Across the stone path, A middle-aged couple had stopped after hearing the sharp cry from the bench. The husband squinted toward the sound, then quickly reached out to stop his wife from pulling out her phone. "Don't film," he said quietly, not loudly, but with urgency. "We don't know who might be backing them." The woman froze for a moment, then withdrew her hand. Her eyes stayed on the girl, hesitant, conflicted, as if between the reflex to be human and the instinct to survive, the latter was winning. Just a few steps away, a bike stopped beneath the oak tree. A young man, early 20s, shirt stained with coffee, cap on backward, pulled his phone from his back pocket. There was no rush, no drama. He simply raised the camera, hit record, and slowly adjusted the focus. The lens quietly captured the three figures, a girl still too stunned to process what had just happened to her, and two grown men in state-issued uniform. His hand trembled slightly, not out of fear of being caught, but because in that shaft of sunlight through the leaves he saw the girl's face. Something about it looked familiar. The features, the eyes. He blinked, then muttered to himself, like a thought escaping, "I think that's the mayor's daughter." His chest rose and fell. One ear burned hot. His fingers tightened around the phone. Memory fragments flashed. Last month's press conference. Mayor Eliza Monroe speaking on police reform. The photo of her smiling with her daughter after the Justice Starts Small campaign. That face, that expression, now right in front of him. Across the street, Amira's sobs had faded. She no longer screamed, only breathed in ragged bursts. Her knees buckled slightly, legs trembling from standing too long in defense. Her backpack had slipped off, fallen to the ground, her phone still in her jacket pocket but far from her thoughts now. Her small hand clutched her skirt, as if protecting the last piece of dignity she had left. Her face burned red. The shame soaked deeper than the tears. The officer standing before her began to sense a shift in the air. A few glances turned their way, not just curiosity anymore. Something was changing, a feeling with no name. No one spoke, but the silence weighed heavily, like a stone pressing down on their shoulders. He glanced around, then turned to his partner. "Hurry, if you're done, let her go." The other man hesitated. He could feel it, eyes on them. Not surveillance, but enough to send a chill down his spine. A gaze from somewhere, sharp as a needle through his uniform. He scanned the trees, benches, and paths, then locked eyes with the young man under the oak, phone in hand. The young man didn't lower the phone, didn't hide, didn't provoke. But his eyes, calm, watchful, held the officer's stare longer than expected. A thought slid through the man's mind, fast and quiet. Did I just touch the wrong person? No one in the park said it aloud. But something had shifted. In the glances, in the cautious footsteps, in the camera lens that kept rolling. Bit by bit, the mask covering their actions was peeling away. A sudden gust of wind shook the branches above, and somewhere within the charged stillness, the sense that nothing could stay hidden anymore had begun to slip through the cracks. Amira was yanked upright, her feet barely steady before being shoved back against the side of the patrol car. Her back hit the cold metal, and her backpack dropped with a thud, sliding a few inches away as if choosing to exit the scene. One of the officers grabbed the collar of her shirt and forced her head down, pressing her face into the window. His sunglasses, hanging from his collar, tapped her cheek, cold as stone. "Hold still. Troublemaker kid," he said, like he was handling a dangerous criminal. His voice wasn't loud or harsh, but it carried that familiar kind of power, the kind that comes from knowing no one is watching. Inside the car, the dashboard gave off steady beeps from the radio system, but no one was answering. The front door sat ajar, revealing a silver-gray file box and an unfinished can of coffee. The normalcy of it all only made what was happening outside feel more absurd. Amira pushed back, not screaming anymore, but her whole body strained. Her hands gripped the edge of the car, trying to push herself away from the weight pressing down on her head. Her forehead touched the glass. Breathing fast, face burning, lips tight. There were no more tears, just quick, heavy breaths, like she was burning through a fever. This was no longer a check or a procedure. It was a display, a public show of force, in a park, under rustling trees, in front of eyes that no longer stepped forward but also no longer turned away. A man stood behind a lamppost, still holding his phone up to record. His friend, tall and thin in a hoodie, shifted nervously, hands deep in his pockets. "If this hits the press," he muttered. "Wait," the one filming whispered, eyes still on the lens. "If that's the mayor's daughter, this is going to explode." His friend flinched, glancing toward the patrol car. "You sure?" The man didn't answer right away, but his arm lowered slightly, as if weighing whether to keep going. Images flashed through his mind. Mayor Monroe's speech about revising use of force laws, a viral video of her speaking with students, and especially that photo of her and her daughter after the press conference on children's rights. In that photo, the girl wore this very same uniform. "Not sure, but if it is," the man continued, voice lower, "then this isn't just abuse of power. This is the whole system stabbing itself in the heart." At the far end of the park, a car horn from the main road echoed faintly. No one looked. All focus remained fixed on the patrol car, where a young girl was still pinned in a submissive stance, and the two officers still hadn't moved their hand. A man in a wheelchair quietly recorded audio using a device hidden in his coat pocket. The elderly street vendor sat at the base of a tree, her head bowed, fingers twisting the edge of her shirt as if to steady herself. A child on a skateboard gave up play for the first time, pulling his cap down over his forehead. No one intervened, but the silence had shifted, no longer the quiet of resignation, but the stillness of a storm. The officers hadn't noticed. They kept moving as always. Fast, cold, certain that everything would be wrapped up in the usual internal report. They still believed those stares would turn away, just as they had hundreds of times before. But this time, the eyes were starting to remember, and in the hands of a few, the phones were no longer just cameras. They were becoming evidence. The slimmer officer stepped slowly toward the front of the car without reaching for a weapon or calling for backup. He grabbed the radio from his belt, pressed the button, but didn't raise it to speak. His thumb held the button down for several seconds, as if waiting for a reply he already knew wouldn't come. Instead of using the radio, he turned back and looked directly at the other officer, still holding Amira against the frame of the car. His voice was clear, unhidden. "Get a shot of her face, so the higher-ups know we've followed protocol." The last phrase landed like a joke. Followed protocol. 3 familiar words in every report, repeated like a shield against all accusations. In his mouth, it was no longer bureaucratic language. It was a cover, immunity, a wink between men who believed that, as long as the paperwork looked right, the action would never be punished. The officer pulled out his department phone and raised it to Amira's face. She turned away, but he grabbed her chin and forced her to face the lens. Sweat dotted her skin. Her eyes were red from tears, and something deeper burned beneath. The photo wasn't meant to be recorded. It was meant to hide. A false image for a moment. No one would question. The crowd hadn't left. An older woman gripped her purse, and a student lowered his head, clutching his phone. No one stepped in, but eyes began to shift. What had started as curiosity now looked like quiet outrage. In the middle of it all, Amira stood against the car, fists gripping her skirt. She didn't plead. She didn't flinch. She stared at the officer, memorizing him. Then, from deep in her chest, it broke out, sharp, loud, and cutting through the entire park. "Mom!" The scream carried not just fear, but fury. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a demand, a shock wave that made the city stop. People jumped. A child covered their ears. An old woman cried. Some turned away, fists clenched. Others stepped forward, then froze. But no one looked the same as before. A young officer arriving from the edge of the park halted. He didn't know what had happened, but that voice stayed in his ears like a warning. Amira kept standing, breathing hard, lips tight. But her eyes were no longer the eyes of a girl begging for protection. They were the eyes of someone forcing an entire system to face what it had become. The air grew heavy enough that footsteps rang out like metal. The officer who had just snapped Amira's photo hadn't saved the file when a man appeared from the tree-shaded path. No uniform, no badge, just a tall, lean figure in a dark brown coat, walking with an eerie calm through the tension. He approached without anyone stopping him. As he reached the officer, still holding a mirror, he leaned in and whispered something short, just one sentence, and the officer froze. His hand pulled back from Amira's shoulder as if burned. His face went pale, eyes darting between the man and the crowd, searching for who had seen or who might already know. He stepped back, lips moving silently. The stranger pulled a small slip of paper from his coat pocket and held it out to the other officer, written in blue ink. "She's the daughter of Eliza Monroe, the sitting mayor." That line shattered whatever confidence the uniform had given them. Silence held for exactly 7 seconds. Then the thinner officer hissed, "Don't tell your mom about this." Amira stood still, her breath still unsteady. That sentence frightened her and stung. As if everything that had already happened wasn't enough, they now needed her silence, wanted to shrink the moment down into something small, and force her to carry it alone. "You hear me?" the other officer growled, lowering his voice but clenching his jaw. "Doesn't matter who your mom is. We were just doing our job. You start telling stories, you're the one who's going to lose." The threat, though quiet, landed louder than any order. Amira said nothing. She gripped her backpack strap, bent down to pick it up, her eyes already blurred with tears. The officer moved as if to say more, but didn't get the chance. From the trees, a low voice cut in. "I think you both should stop." The stranger never gave a title, but his eyes made both officers flinch. In them was something more frightening than rank, knowledge. He knew what had happened, who had done what, and who would have to answer for it. A phone rang in the crowd. Someone had just received a message. Within seconds, notification sounds spread to a second, then a third phone. Faces turned toward their screens. A video was being shared in a private group, a clip from a low angle, starting at the moment Amira was forced against the patrol car, ending with her scream for her mother. Amira didn't know the park was about to witness it all again, this time from an angle that no one could deny. All she felt was the dryness in her throat and pain in her hand, not from being pulled, but because her birthday bracelet had snapped in the scuffle. The thin chain slipped off her wrist and caught on a button. The key-shaped charm was gone. She looked down. The red mark was shallow, but sharp. Her breath hitched, and the tears came. Not sobbing, but that quiet, broken kind, like something had cracked inside. Not from fear, but from humiliation, from being silenced, from losing the bracelet, and from hearing, "You're the one who'll lose." She didn't resist, just cried, and that soft sound made the officer step back, as if losing control of the moment. Both officers stood still, pale and breathless, their jokes suddenly hollow. Their usual confidence crumbled under the quiet stare of the man in the brown coat. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His eyes had already said enough. Behind him, the boy with the phone eased back under the tree. He didn't stop recording. Amira was trembling, head low, hand still gripping her skirt. The broken chain clung to her sleeve, and the red on her wrist was already fading to purple. He didn't know how long to keep filming, but something told him this wasn't just footage anymore. It was a record, a truth, something that no one would be able to ignore. Up front, the thinner officer still held the note, reading it again as if trying to make it disappear. His partner turned to speak but couldn't. His face showed only confusion, the kind that comes when you realize you've crossed a line and can't go back. The man in the coat took one step back. Nothing more. The warning had been given. The fallout was coming from the press, the public, and those above. Amira didn't raise her head, but she heard footsteps retreating, a shaky breath near her ear, and a hand lift from her shoulder, not out of mercy, but fear. The man turned to the two officers, his voice steady and dry as stone. "You just touched someone you weren't allowed to." He didn't raise his voice. The sentence itself was a verdict, and both men standing there knew, this time no internal report would be thick enough to bury it. A gust of wind rushed through the trees. Dry leaves were scattered across the stone path. A phone chimed somewhere in the crowd again, but no one cared who was getting a message now. Every eye was on one person, Amira Monroe. Not because of who her mother was, but because minutes earlier they had all let a child stand alone for far too long. The young man stepped away from the center, still gripping his phone. Once he reached the cover of the trees, out of sight, he replayed the footage. His eyes didn't leave the screen. Amira pinned to the car, her scream, the officer grabbing her chin for a photo. It was all there, every detail clear enough to be proof, and a wake-up call. Without hesitation, he uploaded the video to the city's most used social platform among youth. His account wasn't popular, had few followers, but that never mattered. He knew if it was real enough and timely enough, it would spread. He didn't tag anyone, no location, just one caption before hitting post. If this girl weren't the mayor's daughter, would it have stopped in time? Seconds later, the video began to circulate. Notifications rolled in. The first to share it was a law student. The second, a high school teacher who had once attended Mayor Eliza Monroe's talk on justice in schools. The third user didn't leave a name but commented, "Seen this before. Different face, different day, same behavior." The boy turned off his screen, slid the phone into his jacket pocket, and stood there quietly, watching the bench where it had all happened. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He had simply, this time, chosen to stand on the side of justice. The internal phone in the patrol division's command room rang non-stop, sharp like a hammer pounding against concrete. A dispatcher reached out to pick it up, but the voice on the other end started before he could speak. "Where's the supervisor? Who's covering downtown today? Which unit just touched the Monroe girl?" The dispatcher froze. His grip tightened on the receiver. The voice didn't wait for a reply. "There's a clip going viral. Faces are clear, the license plate is clear. You let two idiots rough up the mayor's daughter like that, in broad daylight, in a public park." Around the room, junior officers began to whisper. One pulled up a social media app. Within seconds, he found the video. Shares climbed by the minute. Comments flooded in, half outrage, half a heavy silence. The kind of silence that always comes right before a storm. The supervisor hung up. Sweat dotted his forehead. He turned to his team, voice rough. "Get those two back to the station. Lock down all external camera feeds, and find out who filmed that clip." Meanwhile, just a few blocks away at City Hall, Mayor Eliza Monroe was leaving a finance meeting. She had just finished 3 hours of budget debate for a community education initiative, her mind still sorting through numbers and documents. Her assistant walked beside her, reminding her of a 4 o'clock session with the deputy council chair. As she stepped down the stone staircase toward her car, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Only 2 lines. "Your daughter was harassed and had her skirt pulled by police in the park," followed by a video link. Eliza stopped. As she opened the clip, her chest tightened. On screen, her daughter stood in a Navy uniform, back pressed against a patrol car. 2 white officers visible. One gripped her shoulder. The video jumped to the 17th second. The other officer tugged at Amira's skirt, in full view of the crowd. By the 35th second, the scream came, "Mom," a sound torn in half by public air, like a slash through the very sense of safety Eliza had fought to build for her city. She said nothing. Her eyes stayed locked on the screen. Her arm felt weightless. A chill crept down her spine, not from wind, but from the ache every mother knows too well. The moment you realize your child was hurt and you weren't there. Her assistant, still unaware, glanced over at the screen and froze, eyes wide. "Oh my God, is that Amira?" Eliza closed her phone. Her face showed no emotion, only her eyes darkened. Slowly, she spoke. "Take me there. Now." Her assistant nodded and ran toward the car. Eliza remained still for a moment, gripping the strap of her bag as if to hold back a rising fury. No statements were made, no rash movements, but everyone nearby understood. This afternoon, the city's schedule would not go as planned. In the back parking lot, an internal communications staffer had just received word. A video tagged Monroe was now trending #1 in the region. The phrase, "mayor's daughter skirt pulled," had started spreading through private political media groups. And somewhere across the city, the mayor's car turned onto the main avenue, heading toward the park. The wind began to rise, not from the weather, but because someone had crossed a line that should never have been tested. The official car stopped at the park entrance. Mayor Eliza Monroe stepped out before the driver could open the door. Her heels clicked evenly across the stone walkway. Not fast, but firm. Her face was unreadable, her gaze steady, as if she already knew what she'd find. She didn't ask questions or look around. She walked straight to where her daughter had been held just minutes earlier. Amira had already been taken to the local clinic, but the scene remained. The patrol car still parked, the bench showing 3 fresh scrapes, her backpack strap frayed and zipper pulled halfway. A young officer nearby started to speak, but her look stopped him, not out of fear, but because her eyes left no room for evasion. She approached the district supervisor, a graying man holding a dispatch report. Her voice was low, steady, and clear. Who was assigned to this area? He glanced down, throat twitching. Unit 4, ma'am. Officer Banks and Sergeant Keller. Have they been brought in? They've been called in for internal review. Eliza lifted her head, locking eyes with him. I want both officers suspended immediately unarmed, and I want a formal order from the department before sunset. It didn't sound emotional, but he knew it wasn't a request, it was an order. Elsewhere in the park, a tech crew reviewed security cameras. One reported, the main camera lost signal at 16:08. The second one is still active, but the footage hasn't been extracted, possibly a memory issue. Eliza looked at the speaker. Who oversaw those 2 cameras today? A young technician raised her hand. I did, ma'am, but the failure was on the server side, not human error. Do you have a backup file? It will take a few hours to retrieve completely. Eliza nodded. She didn't press further, not because she dismissed it, but because she understood. What she needed now wasn't in official footage, it was somewhere else. A communications staffer from City Hall rushed over and handed a phone to her assistant, whispering something before turning the screen toward her. The video was shot on a phone. Every gesture, every look, every word was clear. The image of the girl pressed against the car, the scream for her mother, the hand pulling her skirt. None of it needed repeating. One viewing was enough to imprint it on the mind. The caption below read, "If this girl weren't the mayor's daughter, would it have stopped in time?" Eliza didn't react right away. She watched the video to the end, then quietly returned the phone. Her assistant leaned in and asked, "Should we call an emergency press conference, ma'am?" Eliza shook her head. "Not yet. I need the full disciplinary records of those 2 officers, and I want the first draft of the city council briefing on my desk before 10 tonight." Her voice was calm, but those listening knew the storm inside her had not passed. It was building, not through shouting, but through the sharp focus of someone who understood this. The greatest force isn't in the first reaction, but in how she would respond, through law, through system, and truth. The iron gate at the back of the park opened quietly. No sirens, no escort. Mayor Eliza Monroe stepped out, no longer speaking with the commanding tone she used with subordinates. She had given all necessary orders, and now she wasn't arriving as the head of a city. Wind moved through the oak trees, shaking down the last light onto grass marked by footsteps and camera tripods. Near an old bench, Amira sat curled on a wooden seat covered with a blanket, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her dark school uniform dress was wrinkled, misaligned at the hem. The left sleeve had slipped, revealing a wrist marked by a fading red line. Eliza slowed as she approached. No one followed. She handed her bag to her assistant. Even the air seemed to pause with her steps, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. She stood in front of her daughter for several seconds. No rush to kneel, no words yet. Amira looked up slowly. The tears had stopped, but salt still clung beneath her eyes. Her cheek was swollen. Her chin trembled slightly. Eliza knelt, knees to the ground. She placed her hand gently on her daughter's leg, not gripping, only resting. "How do you feel?" Her voice low, steady, softer than usual. Amira didn't respond. Her lips pressed tight. Her eyes didn't meet her mother's, drifting instead toward the branches above. Wind brushed her hair. Eliza kept her hand there. A full minute passed in silence. Then Amira blinked. Her hand found Eliza's thumb and squeezed gently, not pleading, but checking if she was truly there. "Are you mad?" Her voice barely audible, not asking for blame, but testing if emotions were still safe. Eliza shook her head. "No, sweetheart. I only regret that I wasn't there sooner." A breath escaped the girl's chest. She looked down at her hands. A thread from her broken bracelet clung to her pinky. Her eyes filled again, and she whispered, "He pulled my skirt, then asked if I was hiding something. Everyone saw, but they didn't help me." Eliza's gaze stayed on her daughter's face. Her hand clenched, but she didn't interrupt. The next words came faster, shaken. I didn't know if I was allowed to scream. I didn't know what to do. I was scared if I screamed, then." Eliza placed her hand over her daughter's chest. Her thumb tapped lightly, in rhythm, not as comfort, but as a signal, telling her she was still here, still whole, and that no one had the right to silence her through fear. Amira let out a sob, her first without holding it back. She leaned forward, throwing herself into her mother's shoulder, her small arms wrapped tightly around Eliza, as if letting go would make everything disappear. Eliza's shoulder grew damp, but she didn't wipe away her daughter's tears. She stayed still, giving that pain a place to land without needing to hold it in anymore. When Amira finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but lighter. "I'm okay. It's just, I've never seen eyes like that before. Like I was something they needed to control." Eliza gently touched her cheeks, looking at her daughter's small nose, red from crying. Their eyes met. Eliza whispered, "You're not something to control. You are a person, and what happened to you today, I won't let it go. I won't let you carry this alone. I promise." Amira nodded slowly. She didn't say anything more, but this time when Eliza stood and held out her hand, she took it firmly, without trembling. Eliza rose carefully, still holding Amira's hand in hers. Her thumb pressed once, gently, as if sealing a promise not to let go. Amira squeezed back, briefly but clearly. Her stance was still unsure, her uniform rumpled, but her eyes now held calm and quiet reassurance. As they stepped out of the local clinic, the sunlight had changed. Pale gold, thinner, colder. Around the patrol car, staff from medical, media, internal affairs, and emergency response had gathered. Some held files, some laptops, some radios pressed to their mouths waiting for instruction. They spoke in low voices, exchanged notes quickly, their eyes flicking toward Eliza as she appeared, but none dared look for long. Eliza moved forward, light but steady. She didn't raise her voice or call for anyone. She was simply there, and that presence alone parted the crowd like water. The group stepped back with each quiet footstep, no signal needed. Only her presence was enough. Eyes left their screens, pens stopped moving. Someone pretended to take a call. Someone else stepped back, clearing the path out of instinct. Eliza wore no tactical badge, no police insignia on her shoulder, but everyone understood. No one here held more authority than the mother walking straight toward them, with a child who had just been hurt. She didn't shout. Her gaze, direct, cold, and quiet, drew a clear line between position and presence. It became obvious who stood where, who should step aside. Without a word, Amira followed half a step behind. She looked where her mother looked, then glanced at the people avoiding eye contact or pretending to write. In that moment, she no longer felt like a child mocked in a park. She was someone being protected, not by shouting, but by presence. Not far away, a boy around 14 stood beside his older brother, phone in hand. At first, he only meant to snap a photo of the scene, but when the camera caught Eliza, he instinctively held onto a single frame. The woman in dark business wear, her face sharp, one hand holding her daughter, the other lowered, standing between Amira and everything else. The shot took less than a second. He didn't frame it carefully or use filters, but when he looked at it again, he couldn't bring himself to delete it. Something in that image made him share it with friends, who shared it again. An hour later, the photo appeared on major platforms with one caption, "No words needed. This is what politics looks like when it protects the right person." Within 3 hours, it had passed 50,000 shares. Reporters started tracing the origin, identifying the photographer, verifying the moment, and seeking more context. But no one needed more. The image said it all. In a world too loud with data and declarations, people suddenly went quiet before that photo. A mother, also the most powerful figure in the city, had not used power to guard a seat, but to shield the child standing behind her. 6th-floor conference room, Northgate City Hall. High ceilings, soft yellow lights, and an oval glass-topped table with anti-glare coating. 12 leather chairs are arranged in a circle. On one side sat members of the Internal Affairs and Judicial Committees. On the other, senior officials from law enforcement and government communications. It was nearly 8 p.m., but the room was as bright as day. No one dared to leave. The meeting had been called just an hour after the video of Amira Monroe being pinned against a patrol car and having her skirt pulled went viral nationwide. In that same hour, what began as a local incident had become a national political flashpoint. Eliza Monroe sat at the head of the table, without a secretary. She came alone, carrying a thick stack of documents and her phone face down. Since entering, she hadn't looked away from the open reports before her, an internal statement from the police department, a summary from the Citizen Complaints Division, and preliminary statistics on uninvestigated abuse cases from the past 3 years, data she had personally ordered to be pulled from the original database. The door swung open. Police Chief Wallace Keene entered, tie askew, face pale. He nodded to the room, avoided Monroe's eyes, and sat in the far-left chair. No one blamed him for arriving late, but everyone understood his delay mirrored the state of his department. The city's internal communications lead began the meeting with a quick update. The clip's now being reshared at the federal level. 3 national networks have aired it. Reporters in D.C. are scheduling interviews with Mayor Monroe. The keyword, Amira Monroe, is now in the top 3 most searched nationwide. A council member flipped a page. I want to know what the city's planned response is and whether this case is being taken seriously, because the victim is the mayor's daughter. The question struck the room. A brief silence followed. It wasn't accusatory in tone, but raised concerns about a conflict of interest. Eliza looked up. Her voice wasn't loud, but sharp as steel. I would act the same way no matter whose child she was. She spoke without qualifiers, no legal preface, no name-dropping, just one sentence, but it returned the room to silence. Chief Keene leaned forward to speak, but Eliza continued, slower this time. That girl is my daughter. But first, she is a citizen of this city, and I cannot serve as mayor if I allow the violation of a child, any child, to be excused under any circumstance. One committee member nodded. Another took notes. No one pushed back, not because they feared her, but because the words held logic and conviction. Arguing would mean contradicting their roles. Eliza turned her pen slightly. I'm not defending a child because she's mine. I'm holding this system accountable for how it treats children, with no cameras, no voices, and no one to call meetings like this. Her voice dropped. From across the room, her posture stayed firm, shoulders straight after hours of sitting. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from a federal advisor. New York Times wants confirmation. Will there be an independent investigation? Eliza didn't answer right away. She looked at each person in the room. We're past managing appearances. Either we take responsibility, or the public will. The press conference ended near 10 p.m., but newsroom lights stayed on. Writers paused, not for lack of time, but because this time every sentence mattered. A video had lit the fire, but the system's response would decide if it kept burning. The Northgate Tribune was the first to shift its tone. The next morning's headline dropped the usual phrasing, no more park incident or use of force, just bold, italic black letters, when justice stood on the wrong side. The city owes more than one girl. It owes an apology. The article didn't read like a report. It followed Amira's story, a bright student, daughter of a black mayor, pulled by her skirt and slammed against a patrol car. Under a crowd's gaze, within a system's silence. Then came the question, if no one had filmed, would she have ever been heard? That same night, NNC Local News aired a late special segment inviting former law enforcement officials and social analysts. One of the speakers was Kenneth Dawes, a retired police lieutenant, formerly an instructor at the State Police Academy, and one of the few black officers to have held a precinct-level command. Sitting across from the camera, Kenneth didn't use polished words. He looked straight ahead, voice rough but firm. We can call this an incident, a personal failure. but let's be honest. What happened to Amira? It's not the first time. It's just the first time a camera caught it without being taken. The host paused, then asked, "Do you think this would have been different if she weren't the mayor's daughter?" Kenneth gave a small smile, not amused, but bitter. "The truth is, there are many kids like Amira. They just don't have a mother who's the mayor." That line spread instantly. It was clipped, subtitled, and shared across platforms. The hashtag Justice for Those Unseen began trending. People reposted old photos, old cases, and incidents once buried in internal files or dismissed for lack of evidence. Now everything was being reframed under one question: who hasn't been seen because they weren't someone important's child? At City Hall's communications office, the advisory team was reviewing digital data. Sentiment graphs on social media showed a sharp shift against law enforcement, not from hatred, but from growing doubts about how justice is selectively applied. Eliza Monroe, in her office, was also reading through news excerpts. When she reached Kenneth Dawes's quote, her finger paused at the line, "They don't have a mother who's the mayor." She didn't respond visibly, but something in her eyes told her aide she understood. The story had moved beyond her family. It had become a moral test for the entire city. And in that test, even Eliza wasn't exempt. No one knew exactly where the video started. Around 10:17 p.m., a clip showing a young black girl being pulled by her skirt by two officers in a public park surfaced in private group chats within the black community of Northgate. No sensational headline, no music, no editing. Just under 1 minute of raw footage, accompanied by one short message. "This happened this afternoon, Central Park." At first, the clip spread through neighborhood forums, public school parent groups, church boards, and child advocacy circles. No one talked politics. People shared it for one reason. They saw their daughters in the girl's terrified eyes, restrained, forced to face the camera, with no one stepping in. By midnight, the video began leaking to larger platforms, Reddit, Twitter, and TikTok. This time, the caption changed, "And if it were your child?" 6 words, but enough to stop people cold. It wasn't just a question. It was a mirror, a slap to collective numbness. Viewers stopped seeing it as news and started asking, if not a mirror, if it had been any other child, what would I have done? The hashtag spread fast. "If that was your daughter" became a cross-country flashpoint. Within 3 hours, the clip was reshared over 100,000 times. Unexpectedly, nearly a quarter of the shares came from outside the city, even from states once seen as indifferent to racial injustice. By morning, as the public storm intensified, a nationally conservative TV network, long aligned with law enforcement, included the story in its morning commentary. With a firm tone, an older anchor declared, "This entire incident appears to be weaponized for political gain. A black mayor, an unidentified child, and an incomplete video. We may be watching a staged narrative." The backlash was immediate. Independent journalists clipped the segment, overlaying the original footage, uncut, with a biting caption. "Full context. How much context does it take to make pulling a child's skirt in a park reasonable?" Civil rights lawyers, former educators, Asian and Latin journalists, and even veterans who had served in law enforcement and the military spoke up. They used no harsh words, just posted the video, followed by one unified question: would you want police to randomly check your daughter like this? A wave of media blowback surged, this time not just from the political left, but from citizens long tired of systems excusing harm with procedural language. The public no longer needed guidance. The video, and the network's attempt to soften it, had shifted the story's frame. This was no longer personal misconduct. It was a public test of democratic accountability. On the third morning since the video emerged, a New York-based human rights group, the Justice Now Initiative, held an emergency live-streamed press conference. In less than 1 hour, nearly 2 million people tuned in across platforms. Journalists, activists, attorneys, and professors from major universities all took part. The keynote speaker was Dr. Lorraine Avery, a scholar specializing in structural discrimination in the American legal system. She didn't shout, she didn't call for protests. She stood before the camera, her voice firm and measured. They didn't just pull a little girl's skirt, they tore off the mask called equal opportunity that America wears every election season. This is not a case of misconduct. We are witnessing a replica of a system that filters human rights based on race, class, and political proximity. Her words were clipped, subtitled, and posted across platforms, cited in global broadcasts, from Canada to Australia, from The Guardian to Al Jazeera. At that point, the Northgate incident was no longer local news. It had become a global lens through which the world measured America's promises about justice. Northgate City Hall was forced to call in an independent legal team, not just to investigate the two officers, but to review the entire internal oversight response in the first 2 hours after the incident. A secondary twist emerged. A technical log from the police department's emergency dispatch system was leaked by an anonymous staffer. In the time-stamped log, a conversation between the dispatch center and the on-site command team showed that a mid-level supervisor, assigned to oversee the park patrol, had been notified of an unusual interaction between officers and a minor at 15:59, at least 15 minutes before the skirt-pulling incident involving Amira Monroe occurred. What raised concern was this. In the response field, the supervisor had crossed out "Send Support Response" and handwritten 3 words, "Not yet necessary." At the time of the leak, the department had not confirmed it, but hours later, in an interview with the Daily Constitution, a source from Internal Affairs confirmed, yes, he was warned and he deliberately withheld support because he assessed it as just a routine interaction. Once the call log went public anger shifted from street-level policing to upper-level oversight. People stopped asking why did this happen and started asking who saw and chose to stay silent. Mayor Eliza Monroe received the news while in a strategy meeting. She didn't speak at once. She opened the call recording and listened to the full clip. Her hand on the folder didn't shake, but her thumb tapped the edge 3 times, a habit when she was holding something back. Her advisor said quietly, "We could call for immediate dismissal, but doing that means pulling the oversight division into the investigation." Eliza looked up. "Then we pull them in." 2 days after the video spread, the Northgate Police Department released a 9-page preliminary internal review report. It stated that no footage was recovered from the patrol car's dash cam during the park incident on the 14th. The technical note cited a temporary transmission failure caused by a sync error with the central server. The spokesperson called it rare, unfortunate, with no signs of intentional interference. But within hours, that claim came under fire. Jason Reed, a senior data systems engineer with nearly 6 years at the city's video oversight unit, publicly challenged the report. In a post on the engineer's brief, he wrote, "The equipment didn't fail, it was shut down by command." He shared a screenshot of an internal email sent at 15:42, the day of the incident. Subject, temporarily disable Central Park video feed urgent. The message confirmed shutdown of the South Zone live stream due to signal interference, with instructions not to store the buffer. The post spread fast, over 50,000 shares in 3 hours. Journalists, rights groups, and former city techs reviewed the logs. Most agreed it was not a glitch, it was manual and intentional. The hashtag intentional blackout trended nationwide within 12 hours and headlined evening reports on 3 major news networks. Under growing pressure, the City Council announced an independent investigative committee the next morning. It included a civil liberties representative, a former judge, and 2 policing behavior experts. At the City Hall press conference, Mayor Eliza Monroe kept it simple. "Trust isn't rebuilt by apologies. It takes truth, and I won't accept any system that hides it." Less than 10 minutes after the press conference, backlash from the city's police union began. In a private statement sent to all department employees, the union wrote, "Forming an independent committee with no departmental representation treats officers like criminals. This is no longer an investigation, it is a public sentencing. Union-affiliated accounts quickly posted messages condemning the media for distorting facts, accusing a campaign to erode trust in law enforcement, and calling for members to stand firm against political pressure. On social media, reactions split sharply. Some said the union was shielding itself instead of promoting transparency. Others saw the independent committee as an insult to those who keep order. Regardless of stance, one fact was clear. For the first time in years, a case once marked for internal handling had exposed systemic flaws, backed by evidence, and by insiders willing to speak. Within 4 hours of the committee announcement, the Northgate Police Union held a counter-press conference. Spokesman Lieutenant Frank Mallory, retired, stood before reporters, voice steady and openly angry. Bringing in outsiders who don't understand the pressure of this job to investigate officers is an insult to the entire force. This kills initiative. It paralyzes the ranks. Shortly after, the union issued an internal memo urging officers to limit unnecessary contact with the committee and warning of career risks if recorded or misquoted. Younger officers appeared uneasy. Some were quietly frustrated but afraid to speak. The system had long been conditioned to protect from within first, and any deviation drew wary looks. Yet as law enforcement pulled back into defense, the public stepped forward. By the next morning, a line had formed outside Northgate City Hall, the longest seen in recent memory. Families, students, office workers, and even elderly civil rights veterans from the 80s stood waiting. In their hands, phones, printed forms, or pre-sippled petitions. City Hall officially launched a petition system calling for criminal prosecution of all individuals involved, not just the 2 officers in the video, but also those who ordered the camera shut down, delayed assistance, or distorted protocol. Within a single day, the petition surpassed 10,000 signatures, a record since Northgate adopted its digital civic petition platform. The media called it a vote without ballots. Citizens no longer demanded apologies or suspensions. They wanted indictments. And more than that, they wanted to see the system finally take the side of the vulnerable. In the southern part of the city, on the white wall of a local cafe, someone posted a thick paper black and white poster. The image was pulled from the video. Eliza Monroe standing before her daughter, one arm outstretched like a shield, the patrol car behind them, and the 2 officers just stepping back. There was no title, no mention of politics, just one line beneath it. She's not just the mayor's daughter, she's our daughter. Within an hour, the poster had been photographed and shared online. The first post came from a retired high school teacher, the second from a single mother in Chicago, the third from a man once wrongly arrested due to a name mix-up. He wrote, "Back then no one stood in front of me, so now I share this image." The symbol of the story had moved beyond the city. No one cared whose child she was. What they saw was a girl violated and a mother who didn't step back. This was no longer about the Monroe family. It belonged to everyone who had ever stayed silent, been pushed aside, or wished someone would stand up. And this time, they had an image to remember. On Wednesday night, the Northgate City Hall lit up earlier than usual. Over 500 chairs filled the main floor, with 2 large screens at either end of the hall to support the first live town hearing between officials and residents since the park incident. There was no stage set up, just a wooden podium, 3 open microphones rotated among speakers, and a row of seats for representatives from the police department, the prosecutor's office, the mayor's office, and the Independent Investigation Committee. Eliza Monroe was present, not seated at the center, not wearing a mayor's badge, holding only a thick folder and sitting quietly between 2 city council members. The atmosphere wasn't that of a courtroom, but it wasn't a casual town hall either. No one shouted. People stood, lined up behind the microphone, one by one, asking questions that no agency on stage could avoid. The first speaker was a silver-haired woman, around 60, wearing a T-shirt with her granddaughter's face printed on it. She spoke slowly, her southern accent soft but clear. "I was a nurse for nearly 40 years. I've dressed many wounds, but I never learned how to bandage a child who was hurt by someone trained to protect her. Next came a young man in a worker's shirt, holding up an old phone with the clip playing. How many seconds of this video do you need to understand it was wrong? But the quietest moment in the room came from someone no one expected. A man who looked entirely ordinary. Khaki pants, white button-down shirt, blonde hair, wedding ring. He stood in the 5th row, carrying a small photo. When he reached the mic, he didn't speak for the first 10 seconds. He simply held up the picture, which was of his daughter, with chestnut curls, in a school uniform, standing on her front porch. "This is my daughter," the man said, his voice low and rough. "She's not black. She's never been profiled. But when I saw that video, I kept asking, if that were my child, what would I want to see happen next?" The room fell silent. He lowered the photo, looked toward the officials. "I'd want someone held responsible, not out of revenge, but to be sure my daughter isn't growing up in a city where silence is called professional." Then Diana Park, a local high school literature teacher, stood up. No notes, no speech, just clarity. "We teach students that doing right doesn't depend on power, but on courage. We grade essays on justice, on being citizens, so how do we explain this when those in charge do the opposite?" She turned to the police chief. "I don't want an apology. I want your officers taught to see a child without assuming a threat. If our students see you undo everything we teach, our lessons become hollow." A round of applause followed, steady and long. The tone in the room shifted. No more just anger, but truth being named, clearly and calmly, by those who once thought they couldn't speak. After the hearing, pressure on city officials became urgent. People weren't asking for clarity. They demanded action. The next morning, the mayor's office confirmed. The 2 officers were suspended indefinitely and would face possible rank removal, a required step before civil or criminal charges. The decision didn't shock anyone. It was how quickly those involved responded. Sergeant Keller, seen in the video pulling Amira's skirt, deleted all personal social media within an hour. His Facebook vanished. Twitter was deactivated. Instagram went private, then disappeared from search. Media crowded outside Keller's home in the city's west side suburbs, but all they found was a closed iron gate, drawn curtains, and no response to the doorbell. A new "No Trespassing" sign had been posted on the fence. Some reporters saw movement behind a second-floor window, but nothing could be confirmed. Sergeant Banks responded differently. He didn't delete anything, but locked down his accounts, set them to private, and stopped posting. His home on the east side remained shut. Neighbors said the family hadn't left in 3 days. Some heard arguments inside, a woman crying, objects hitting the wall. Media pressure played a role, but what truly tightened the pressure was the isolation from the very system they once served. The police union, though publicly opposing the independent investigation, didn't step forward to defend them as expected. In closed meetings, many members avoided backing what was seen in the video. HR liaisons declined to comment. Some retired officers privately advised them to step back. Before it gets worse. A week ago, they wore uniforms and were saluted. Now, they stood in silence, spotlighted by a justice system they once thought they controlled. On social media, news of their suspension didn't spark cheers. There were no victory laps. Just questions, quiet but sharp. What if there was no video? What if it wasn't the mayor's daughter? Would anyone have been suspended? The public began turning inward, asking, how many times have we looked away? Seen a child stopped on the curb, a black person pulled over, a uniformed glare of suspicion, and chosen to walk faster instead of stopping. The truth is, the girl in the video didn't stay silent. At just 12 years old, when pinned to the side of a car, she screamed for her mother, not because she knew help would come, but because instinct told her to reject what was being done to her. Now the question is no longer why did they do that? It's she didn't stay silent. So what were we afraid of when we did? On the 4th floor of the city's internal oversight headquarters, the room labeled Frontline Conduct Review was usually quiet, but tonight the lights stayed on past 7. Dozens of printed reports lay across the table, patrol logs, dash cam data, and complaints spanning the past 7 years. At the desk sat Joshua Myers, a senior internal investigator often described as the man who never lets opinion into a report. He had been assigned to review the full record of the 2 suspended officers. Officially, his role was to support the independent investigative committee. In truth, Joshua had received a direct order, in person, not by email. A deputy director from the administrative office had looked him straight in the eye and said, "Don't let this go too far. Don't shake the whole system. Focus on the individual conduct, nothing more." Joshua didn't reply, but when he returned to his desk, he sat in silence for a long time. He understood the message wasn't isolated. It was part of a familiar reflex. Stay quiet to avoid exposing a structure already rotting from within. Meanwhile, across the building, in the legal office of Mayor Eliza Monroe, Senior Counsel Mira Caldwell was doing the exact opposite. A former federal civil rights attorney, Mira didn't believe in individual misconduct when patterns repeated with precision. After 3 days of supporting the independent team, she stumbled across an old document buried in a folder marked "Unavailable due to structure error." She unlocked it by decoding the file's ID tag, not its name. Inside were 4 separate complaints from 3 years ago, all alleging harassment, verbal abuse, or physical contact by the same patrol unit as the 2 suspended officers. The names matched. The locations were similar. The complainants were all people of color or minors. Most telling, all 4 were marked "Insufficient evidence, no further investigation." The sign-off? 1 name, then Deputy Head of Internal Review, now promoted to Regional Policy Coordinator for the city's North Zone. Mira printed the full document, noted the names involved, and sent a summary to Eliza Monroe within 3 hours. When Eliza reached the line, "Patterns repeated across 4 files, all closed with identical wording, quick resolution, no secondary review," her face didn't change. But Mira noticed her hand stopped turning the page and stayed there for nearly a full minute. Across town, inside a private online group for veteran officers, closed to media and union officials, a soon-to-retire officer spoke up for the first time. His name was Daniel Huxley, with over 30 years of frontline command. He didn't write a long post, just a few words. "I've seen this many times, and we've always wiped it clean." A few reactions followed. No one pushed back. One member asked, "So what now, Dan?" He replied, "This time, someone hit record." No short sentence had shaken the system quite like that, because it confirmed what many already knew but had never said. This wasn't the first time. It was just the first time they couldn't erase it. News about the patrol unit linked to the suspended officers spread beyond the official inquiry. As public attention focused on current misconduct, a team of investigative reporters turned to the past. The Ledger, known for its deep-dive coverage, began reviewing all incidents recorded within 2 miles of Central Park. In the archives, veteran journalist Nina Patel found a short article nearly 6 years old. Black female student, age 13, reportedly subjected to random administrative check in Northgate Park, later absent from school for several months. No footage existed, no photos. The report ran between a house fire and local sports score, but one detail caught Nina's eye. The girl's name was never followed up as returned to school. Digging into her school records, Nina's team found the file had abruptly ended, listed as transferred out of district, destination unknown. No one investigated further at the time, but the original police report from that day listed the same patrol unit, Banks and Keller. Strangely, the file mentioned nothing about a stop involving a minor, only noting no unusual activity recorded. Nina and the outlet's legal team tracked down the girl's former address, but the apartment had changed hands. Neighbors remembered little. One said, "They left quietly. She didn't say goodbye." When the story resurfaced, this time on the front page, with details and a full patrol history, it stopped being an isolated loss. It became a thread linking past and present failure. At the same time, an anonymous source, a former senior investigator from the Northgate Police Department, contacted reporters through a secure line. The 42-minute call was recorded and verified. He confirmed the Central Patrol team, especially Banks and Keller, had long been flagged as high risk, yet complaints always landed on the deputy chief's desk and disappeared. "There's a culture of silent protection," he said. "It's not policy. It's the way files stay unopened, how someone quietly signals, 'This one's trusted. They've handled tough cases.' That's how the system hid things, not by erasing, but by never letting them surface." He said he once pushed to reopen 3 cases marked no evidence and was told, "Don't disrupt the flow. They're our tightest team." It was then he realized some were protected, so long as they kept things quiet. Even if others paid for it, when the recording aired on the weekend news, the anchor gave no closing remark. He only repeated the source's final words. "I thought silence kept the system intact. Now I know. Silence is the crack." At noon on the 8th day after the video surfaced, an unexpected post appeared on the personal social media page of Officer Raina Torres, age 29, stationed at Northgate Precinct 4. The same unit once home to Banks and Keller. Her account had never drawn attention, mostly filled with photos of night patrols and fellow officers. But this time, her post had a single headline: "I'm stepping away from the force because I no longer believe I'm protecting justice." Attached was a handwritten letter, photographed and posted in full. She wrote, "I used to believe I joined to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But this past week, I've realized I'm protecting the uniform, no matter what the person wearing it has done. I worked at the same station as 2 officers who touched a child, and came back to work like nothing happened just because the case was under investigation. I can't believe silence is neutrality anymore. Silence has become complicity." She didn't name anyone, she made no accusations, but what she wrote sent shockwaves. Thousands shared it within 6 hours. Some called it the first letter to draw the line between loyalty and integrity. That letter struck a match against layers of silence. On social media, former officers of color began telling stories they once buried. A former sergeant in Ohio wrote, "I objected to random stops. 3 months later, I was demoted for lack of team cooperation." Another, a black former community officer, wrote, "I said someone on our team treated black women unfairly. They didn't investigate. They reassigned me over 30 miles from home." The story outgrew Northgate. It spread across neighboring states, into police academy forums, veterans groups, and legal networks defending law enforcement rights. No one was debating the video anymore. The question now was, how did so many people know and let it happen? At a public ethics forum hosted by Northgate University titled "Trust and Morality in Public Service," one speaker said something that made the entire room stop writing. The speaker was Lieutenant Daniel Min, an Asian American officer with over 15 years in the force. Known for his quiet presence, he had never spoken publicly until now. Standing at the podium, he said clearly, "We're trained well, yes, but most of that training is about control. We're taught to command, restrain, and assess danger. But who in the system ever asks who controls us?" The room was silent. Lifting the child off the ground isn't a situation. Pulling her skirt can't be called a safety check. The issue isn't skill, it's treating ethics like optional software. His words were broadcast widely. Ethics professors called it one of the strongest statements from inside the force. Trust hadn't shattered from a single blow. It cracked slowly from stories, resignations, and memories once buried, now spoken by those who wore the badge. Since the suspension of Banks and Keller, tension inside the Northgate department hasn't eased. Greetings are brief. Hallway talk stops when someone passes. Officers still show up, but few linger. The divide runs deep, not between cops and citizens, but among the officers themselves. One group, mostly younger or from minority backgrounds, pushes for transparency. "If we can't act when the evidence is this clear, who are we?" one asked. Sergeant Lauren Key, 32, once honored for saving a child, wrote privately, "If we're no better than what we condemn abroad, what are we protecting besides our uniforms?" Others disagree. Older officers say the media is rushing to convict. One retired captain said, anonymously, "I don't defend wrong, but letting public pressure decide guilt, today it's them, tomorrow any of us." The atmosphere inside the department grew heavy. Some unit leaders suggested moving briefings online. A group of younger officers requested reassignment. The sense of 2 camps under one roof was no longer a feeling, it was now a fact. Outside, citizens weren't waiting for the system to fix itself. In less than 2 days, a coalition of lawyers, activists, and political science professors launched an online platform to conduct a citywide public poll. The question was simple but powerful enough to shake the system's foundation. Do you support removing internal oversight from police departments and transferring it entirely to an independent civilian board elected by the community? At first, people were skeptical. But when the video of Amira resurfaced with the caption, "Without outside cameras, nothing would have happened," participation surged. Universities, churches, and professional associations shared the link. Some businesses gave employees break time to vote. Within 36 hours, over 100,000 people participated. Nearly 70% voted yes. Even before final tallies, media outlets called it the strongest spontaneous political response Northgate has seen in a decade. Mayor Eliza Monroe received the update the next morning. When she reached the line, highest support came from young voters and parents with minors. She looked up from the report, eyes drifting toward her office window. No one spoke, but the message was clear. The story had entered a new chapter. It was no longer about one girl, no longer about 2 officers. It had become a societal test, whether Northgate would dare restructure power, even if it meant those who used to control would have to step back. 1 week had passed since the video of Amira's incident went viral nationwide. And while the city's political system remained tense and in flux, the 12-year-old girl had never appeared in front of a camera or microphone. She hadn't spoken to the press, made statements in court, or posted on social media. But on Monday morning, a short voice recording, less than 1 minute long, was shared through the City Hall's communications advisor, per Amira's direct request. The audio file was distributed to every local broadcast network, with one note attached: no visuals, audio only. The voice that played was young but steady. "I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I'm not broken. I'm just scared that next time they'll do it to someone else and no one will film it. So if anyone hears this, I just want to ask one thing. Please don't let the next person have to scream like I did. No tears, no drama." But the clip aired repeatedly on the radio, podcasts, news breaks, and was even played in classrooms during first period across multiple schools. At Amira's middle school, students didn't post messages of sympathy. Instead, a group led by a black student named Jayla Griffin sent an open letter to the city's Department of Education. The letter didn't mention police. It didn't demand suspensions or special treatment. It asked for one thing only: we want to learn what our rights are. Not after someone pulls our skirts, but before, so we know what bodily autonomy means. We want civil rights, citizenship rights, taught as part of the actual curriculum, not just in war timelines and constitutional history. The letter spread fast. School board members reposted it. Some district principals expressed support. A spokesperson from the Department of Education announced, "We are reviewing updates to next semester's curriculum." That had never happened in Northgate, where civics was usually lumped into U.S. history and rarely included modern human rights education. When students start asking to understand their rights, the education system can no longer ignore them. But it wasn't only the youth who responded. On a local parenting forum, one post drew thousands of reactions. It came from Melanie Ross, a single mother in the city's southern district where income is low and student surveillance is high. The post began with a short sentence: "I've been silent for 3 years, but after Amira's recording, I can't stay silent anymore." The writer, Melanie Ross, said that 3 years ago her daughter, then only 11, was stripped in the schoolyard bathroom for a drug check after a teacher claimed she was too quiet to be normal. No drugs were found. No official report was filed. The school offered a single sentence in response. It was an internal procedure. No medical harm was done. Melanie wrote, "I didn't file a lawsuit. I didn't speak up. I was scared my daughter would face retaliation. I had no husband, no money for a lawyer, and back then there was no video. But today, when I heard a child say, 'Please, don't let the next person have to scream,' I realized I'm part of the reason the next one had to scream." She ended the post with, "Silence didn't keep my child safe. It only made it easier for the next ones to be hurt. Hundreds of parents commented. Some admitted they'd experienced similar things. Their children's bags searched, black students questioned more often, and no incident ever documented. Amira's case was no longer a conclusion. It was now the beginning of a chain of suppressed memories in a community where silence had long been treated as self-defense. In the final days of the month, just as public outrage seemed to be settling, a single article from a quiet journalist, rarely seen in mainstream press, triggered the loudest shockwave yet. Her name was Evelyn Hart, a former war correspondent who had quietly followed the events in Northgate for 10 days without comment. But as the system stood on the edge of rupture, she published a nearly 3,000-word feature in The Atlantic, titled simply, "Not Just a Child's Wound." Let me know if you'd like the full translation of Evelyn Hart's article summary or its continuation. The article didn't recap the video or name names. Evelyn Hart went straight to the core, how a system can look a child in the eye and still choose to be wrong. We thought systems failed in chaos, but the real danger is they failed calmly. No one in the video panicked. No one lost control. They did what they were trained to do, because they believed nothing would happen to them. The shame wasn't in the pulled dress. The shame was in a whole system, fully aware, doing it anyway. Evelyn didn't write like a reporter. She wrote like a sister who watched her sibling wrongfully arrested, like someone who knows what being invisible feels like. The humiliation doesn't belong to Amira. It belongs to us, for choosing safety over justice. The piece went viral. Over 1 million shares in 3 days. Then a pencil-written journal entry by Amira, found by a classmate and shared with permission, began spreading. It read in shaky handwriting, "If my mom wasn't the mayor, I probably wouldn't still be here to write this. It wasn't a protest, it was a quiet, devastating truth." The line appeared everywhere, on whiteboards, sidewalks, and school lockers. One teacher posted, "This line won't let me sleep. I teach hundreds of kids each year and only one has a mother like Eliza Monroe. The rest? Who will protect them? Who will listen? Who will stand up before they have to scream like Amira?" Amira's words didn't ask for sympathy. They asked a harder question. What happens to the children without cameras, headlines, or powerful parents? The ones who still get hurt, just more quietly. Pressure has never ceased to mount on the office of Northgate Mayor Eliza Monroe since the video of Amira surfaced. As public outrage temporarily subsides to make way for institutional decisions, Monroe's mayoral seat faces its most politically charged challenge since the beginning of her term. On Thursday afternoon, a joint petition from 9 state legislators, mostly members of committees overseeing law enforcement and homeland security, was sent directly to the governor's office and the local legislature. The language was not personally accusatory, but the message was unmistakable. "We respect Mayor Monroe's role, but to ensure fairness and impartiality in investigations involving the city's police force, we recommend she temporarily step back from all direct oversight responsibilities, including internal affairs supervision, budget allocations, and senior personnel coordination." The document cited a serious conflict of interest, emphasizing that Amir being Monroe's daughter means any decision she makes, right or wrong, could be perceived as emotionally driven. Once the information leaked, media outlets quickly picked up the story. Some analysts described it as a subtle yet dangerous political attack, aiming not to discredit Monroe's competence, but to gradually erode her influence by questioning her integrity. The mayor's office initially declined to comment. However, by Friday morning, news spread that Eliza Monroe would personally attend an emergency session of the local legislature later that day. The chamber was packed. Reporters filled the aisles, and those who couldn't get inside watched from screens in the square. Eliza stepped up to the podium without prepared notes. She held no papers, only a slim watch on her wrist and a city emblem pinned to her dark coat. Her eyes passed over the row of 9 legislators who had signed the petition. Without preamble or avoidance, she began. "I've heard your petition. I understand your concerns, and I know this isn't a debate about capability. It's about character. If protecting a child from someone wearing a uniform means I'm considered biased, then I accept that." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "If refusing to stay silent while my daughter was violated in broad daylight is labeled abuse of position, then write it in the record. But I will not apologize for doing what is right." A ripple moved through the chamber. Some legislators looked down to write. Others stayed silent. No one interrupted. Eliza continued, "I don't stand here on behalf of my daughter. I stand for every child who doesn't have a mother powerful enough to be heard. And I won't let anyone strip that away, whether in the name of fairness or bureaucratic procedure." She took no questions from the press. She left the podium and exited through the main doors to a mix of applause and silence. But no one could deny she didn't retreat, and she didn't ask for permission to stay. Her speech quickly spread across social media. The hashtag #IfProtectingMyChildIsBiased trended instantly. A video of her final look in the chamber, neither angry nor apologetic, only unwavering, was replayed across news cycles. The session at the State House seemed to end there, but as Eliza turned to step down, the sharp sound of footsteps echoed, followed by a voice, loud, deliberate, without a mic. "Mayor Monroe, you're dividing the police force." The speaker was State Senator Graham West, former chair of the Security Committee and longtime defender of law enforcement. He now led the group calling for Eliza's removal from police oversight. The room fell silent. Cameras turned toward him. Eliza, mid-step, paused. She turned back and returned to the podium without being invited. She stood tall, locked eyes with him, and said clearly, without the mic, "No, Senator, I'm not dividing the police force. I'm doing my duty." A quiet wave passed through the chamber. Eliza didn't raise her voice, but her tone left no room for rebuttal. She continued, "I didn't draw the line. I'm simply pointing to the one you already drew. And now expect me to pretend it doesn't exist." Eliza Monroe stood in front of the packed chamber, facing 9 state legislators who had called for her removal from overseeing the police investigation. She didn't bring notes and didn't raise her voice. "If protecting a child from someone wearing a badge makes me biased," she said, "I accept that. But I won't apologize for doing the right thing." Her words weren't defensive. They were direct, calm, and unwavering. When Senator Graham West accused her of dividing the police force, Eliza returned to the podium. "No, Senator, I'm not dividing the police," she replied. "I'm doing my job." She pointed out that the true division came from silence. When rules were broken and no one was held accountable, "You drew the line," she said, "and now you want me to pretend it's not there?" Her final question landed heavily. If we don't stand with a child treated like a criminal for her race and gender, who will we stand for? Then she left the room, not asking for permission and not giving ground. The moment went viral. Her words were quoted across media and social platforms, especially the line, "I'm pointing to the line you drew." Commentators called it one of the boldest moments of political truth in recent memory. That night, a former ethics officer posted anonymously in a private forum, "I've seen cases like Amira's before, only without cameras." The post ended with a line that echoed far beyond its forum. "We're not divided, we've simply seen who still stands with the people." 2 weeks after the video of Amira shook the nation, the Northgate Police Department released a brief but groundbreaking statement. Signed by the newly appointed acting director, it announced the reopening of all misconduct files from the past 10 years, with an unprecedented civilian review process that included community lawyers, ethics experts, and elected representatives. For the first time, oversight was no longer internal. The announcement marked a turning point. Long viewed as a self-policing force, the department was now subject to the same public scrutiny it once resisted. While some critics warned of political interference, most citizens welcomed the change with quiet hope. The very next day, the district attorney charged officers Banks and Keller with abuse of power and harassment of a minor. Though neither received jail time, both were fined $30,000 and permanently banned from law enforcement. In the courtroom, there was no applause, only silence, and Amira's mother watching from the back, her hands finally unclenched. This wasn't just justice served. It was a signal that silence would no longer protect the powerful. Across the city, a quieter response began taking root, hinting at something deeper, the first real shift in a culture long built on fear and denial. Diana Park, the high school teacher who once stood at the public hearing in City Hall, launched the first education initiative born directly from the Amira case. It was called Justice Class, not a course on statutes or legal theory, but a safe space where students could speak about moments when they felt violated, humiliated, or disrespected by people in power. There were no grades, no exams, no cameras, just trained educators, volunteer lawyers who translated legal rights into children's language, and a classroom that promised one thing: to listen. The first session had only 18 students, but within 2 weeks, over 30 schools across the district signed up. A 7th grade girl wrote on a slip of paper, "It's the first time I didn't feel invisible." No one expected a park incident to create a classroom. But sometimes justice doesn't start with a subpoena. It starts with a child who's finally allowed to speak, and someone willing to hear. Less than a week after the sentencing of Officers Banks and Keller, Mayor Eliza Monroe held a special press announcement at the Civic Hall, once used as the emergency command center during the height of the crisis. There were no banners, no flags, just a wooden podium surrounded by community leaders, civil rights attorneys, and education liaisons. There, Eliza formally launched a nonprofit called One Child is Enough, with seed funding from the city's Social Reserve Fund and donations from over 100 businesses and private donors within just 5 days. The mission statement was clear: to provide independent, long-term, and free legal support for minors harmed by law enforcement, coercive school systems, or any public agency that violates a child's body, privacy, or dignity without legal consent. Beyond legal aid, the foundation partnered with national law schools to launch a juvenile justice internship program where students, mentored by veteran attorneys, could work on real community cases without political filters or red tape. Speaking to the press after the ceremony, Eliza kept it simple. "I don't want a child to have to wait until their mother is a mayor to finally hear an apology." But the most powerful act that day didn't come from her. It came from Amira. For the first time, she stepped on stage beside her mother. No uniform, no longer tucked behind anyone's shoulder. She wore a deep blue dress, her braided hair draped gently to one side, and her gaze was steady, as if what happened to her now belonged to the past, no longer holding power. In her hands wasn't a speech, but a white sign with a single, bold, handwritten line. "I don't want to be remembered as the girl who got her skirt pulled. I want to be remembered as the one who stood for justice." No chants followed, no banners waved, but everyone present that day felt something real the moment a victim became the author of her own story. A child, once forced to face the window of a patrol car, now stood before the public, holding the final image of that incident and reversing its meaning. No one asked her to do it, no one wrote it for her. According to her principal, Amira wrote it herself after learning the foundation would help kids like me, but who don't have a mom like Eliza Monroe. The photo of Amira holding the sign was taken by a volunteer teacher. No press camera, no stage lighting, just a quiet moment, enough to tell the world that justice isn't only about what adults do after harm is done. Sometimes it's about whether a child is given the right to write the final chapter herself. In the 3rd week after the 2 officers were indicted, after the foundation was launched and Amira's sign shook the city, the press began to pull back, not because the story was over, but because the news cycle always chases what is newer, louder, and more marketable. Coverage shifted from hearings to a high-speed train crash in a neighboring state. On mainstream channels, Amira's image slowly faded. Opinion columns moved on. Hashtags that once dominated the charts slipped from trending lists. But in Northgate, one thing stayed the same. Every Sunday from morning to dusk, locals continued to gather at the Central Park, where the incident took place. No banners, no chants, just small groups, individuals, or entire families quietly standing in the same spot where the girl had once been pressed against the patrol car window. They didn't say much. Some left flowers. Others tied ribbons to the nearby tree branches. Most simply stood still for a few moments, then quietly walked away. There were no memorials, no organizers. Yet somehow the park became a silent pilgrimage site for conscience, as if what had happened there left a cut, one that didn't bleed but refused to be stepped over. An elderly retired nurse left a small card in the grass with just 3 lines. "You stood still. Now it's our turn to stand with you. Every week, until it's no longer needed." Not far from the park, on the 3rd floor of the city library in the community art exhibit space, a painting was newly hung. It had no title, no signature, no description, just a raw wooden frame, canvas painted in oil, sized so you had to stand close to see it. The image captured the now iconic moment. Eliza Monroe standing tall, one arm outstretched to shield Amira, who wasn't bowing, even though she was visibly trembling. Behind them, the patrol car was blurred like a ghost. Ahead, a soft light opened in the corner of the sky. The morning librarian was the first to see it. It had been there since she opened the doors. No one knew who had brought it. The security cameras didn't catch the exact moment. But the night guard recalled, "I saw someone in a hoodie and mask standing at the end of the hallway around 5 a.m. They didn't speak, just set the painting down and left." Since that day, the painting became a quiet destination for hundreds each week. Children stopped to ask, "Who painted this?" Adults didn't have an answer, only said, "Probably someone who saw clearly." An art teacher visiting the painting with her students left a note in the guest book. Art doesn't always need a gold frame or a name. Sometimes it just needs to stand in the right place and speak the truth in silence. The event was never reported, no one organized an opening, but by the 4th week, the library decided not to take the painting down after the community exhibit's usual end date. They rewrote the policy for the first time since opening and named the space the corner that didn't look away. A few weeks after Central Park quietly became a place where people came not to protest but simply to remember, a high school in the Westgate district chose to do something unprecedented in its history. It held a no-uniform day. The principal, Amanda Lay, who had followed Amira's story from the start, submitted the proposal to the school board with a short, candid explanation. "We are not abolishing the uniform policy. We just want one day where students can choose what they wear and understand that safety should never depend on the length of a skirt or the color of a hoodie." The event was held on a Friday, exactly 1 month after the incident. No slogans, no speeches. Just a message on the school's digital board. "Today you get to be yourself and be respected for it." No one expected it, but nearly every student and teacher participated. One group wore plain white t-shirts, each with a handwritten message in marker. "Clothes don't define dignity." Another student wore the school uniform skirt, but with a small sign pinned to her back. "This is a skirt, not an invitation." There was no backlash. Just softer glances in school hallways, quiet questions during homeroom. If it were me, would I have dared to scream? That afternoon, during a small roundtable between parents, teachers, and mental health professionals, Dr. Sarah Melvin, a child psychologist, shared something that left the room silent. "When we work with kids who've been traumatized by abuses of authority, the first question we hear isn't, 'Why did they do this to me?' but 'Why didn't anyone stand up for me?'" She paused, then added, "The deepest wound isn't the act of pulling a skirt. It's the moment a child looks around and sees no one coming toward them." The quote, unadorned and raw, spread across social media not as a soundbite, but as a quiet confession many had carried in silence. Around the same time, in a small room behind City Hall, away from microphones or cameras, Eliza Monroe was hosting a series of private meetings she called her personal reckoning. The guest list was short, just over 20 people. The student who recorded the video, the teacher who wrote the open letter, the single mother who spoke up, the bus driver who mailed a handwritten note with a single line, I couldn't help her that day, but I cried when I watched the clip. Eliza made no speeches, no gifts or public thanks. Each meeting lasted no more than 10 minutes. She looked them in the eye, shook hands if they offered theirs, and said only one thing: "Thank you for not turning away." None of them were people of public influence, but each had made a choice to stop, to speak, to write when it would have been easier to stay silent. Eliza knew she couldn't reform the system alone, but she also knew justice couldn't stand without ordinary people choosing what was right in moments when no one asked them to. On a regular Saturday afternoon, with the late sun casting a soft slant through the tall trees of Northgate Park, Amira returned to the place where everything had happened. It was her first time. No mother beside her, no reporters, no one knew, no one waited. Just the girl and Elliot, her classmate and closest friend, the one who had once hurried to delete a video he thought might bring her more trouble, but later was the same person who quietly sent a backup copy to the place it needed to go. They didn't talk much on the way. Elliot carried a water bottle and a canvas sling bag. Amira brought only her phone, walking in small, steady steps. She still looked like the 7th grader she was, white sneakers worn at the edges, hair tied high, no makeup, no statement clothing, but her eyes, sharpened by the weeks gone by, were no longer looking to be guided. They knew where they were going. They stopped near the bench by the park's largest tree bed. Here, based on GPS markers and clips from the video, Amira had been cornered by 2 officers, their stares rifling through her, their hands pushing her toward the patrol car. She stood still for a moment. The breeze grazed her sleeves. Elliot didn't ask anything. He just sat down, hands on his knees, waiting for her to speak first. After a while, Amira pointed to the stone bench beside them. "There. I stood there, and I asked for help, but no one cared." Her voice wasn't tearful. It sounded like a marker being planted in the ground, as if to say, "I was here. I was left behind, and now I've come back, not to reclaim, but to certify." Elliot lowered his head, not in shame, but because he understood that in this moment there was nothing he could fix, and nothing he could promise about what came next. But there was one thing he could do: preserve this moment, exactly as it was. He took out his phone. He didn't film Amira's face, didn't show his own, just framed the bench, the muted stillness of a late afternoon, the fading sun gently casting itself across the park's stone floor. He whispered, "This time, I'm recording, not to share, just to remember." Amira didn't say anything more, but Elliot knew, without a nod, without a single word, that he had done exactly what needed to be done. A few moments later, they left. No one noticed. No one asked for a photo. No whispers were interrupting the quiet meeting of 2 young friends at the spot where justice once broke apart and now was slowly being pieced back together, not by any system, but by memory and truth shared between people. That evening, Elliot didn't post anything online. He simply saved the clip in a private folder and named it "We Were There." He didn't send it to anyone, didn't show it to his classmates, didn't tell his parents. But a week later, when their language arts teacher launched a writing contest titled "A Place That Changed How I See Others," Elliot wrote only 2 lines and left the rest blank. A stone bench, a quiet afternoon, and a friend who stood for justice. That was enough. As the sun slipped lower behind the tree line, and Elliot powered off his phone to walk with Amira toward the park gate, they heard a small voice behind them. "Excuse me." They both turned. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, stood a few yards away. He clutched a small notebook, his sneakers were untied, and his hair was tousled by the wind. His eyes didn't hold the kind of curiosity adults often have, but rather the kind children carry when they've seen something that shifted them, even if they don't yet have words for it. He hesitated, then stepped closer and lifted his notebook. "You're the girl in the picture, right? The one standing with your mom?" Amira didn't answer right away. She looked at the boy, not particularly tall, not especially remarkable, but his eyes held something she recognized instantly, a leftover fear, the same kind she had carried herself just months before when she had walked away from this park on trembling legs, the marks of that day still etched deep within her. She smiled, not the tight, forced kind adults give when they're pretending to be fine, but the kind of smile that comes from someone who once wasn't and no longer hides it. "No," she said gently. "I'm not the girl in the photo. I'm someone who used to be scared." The boy squinted, puzzled. "Are you not scared anymore?" Amira shook her head. "I still am. I just don't let fear decide who I am." He didn't ask anything else, but after a quiet pause, he opened his notebook and flipped to the last page. He didn't write, he just showed it to her. A rough pencil sketch of a stone bench, a little girl standing beside it, and a faint shadow drawn behind her. Amira took the notebook, studied it, then handed it back, tapping the page softly. "It's beautiful. But if you draw it again, could you add one more person?" "Who?" "You, standing closer, so next time someone's afraid, they'll know they're not alone." The boy nodded, saying nothing. He hugged the notebook tightly to his chest, as if afraid the wind might carry away the memory. Then he turned and walked off in the opposite direction, never once looking back. Elliot didn't speak for the rest of the walk. Not until they were nearly at the park gates did he glance sideways and murmur, "You know, you talk to kids better than the principal does." Amira laughed softly, like an exhale, but in her eyes was something new, the calm of someone who had just laid the first brick for someone else to follow. That night, when she wrote in her journal, Amira didn't mention the boy. She didn't recount the sketch or what was said. She simply wrote one line at the very bottom of the page before closing the book. "Fear isn't wrong. What's wrong is doing nothing with it." The fourth week since Amira returned to the park passed in silence. Not the kind that comes with forgetting, but the kind that signals quiet change within the system. At the Northgate Police Department, an unexpected stream of job transfer requests flooded human resources. They weren't from those nearing retirement or under disciplinary review. They came from younger officers, experienced enough to understand the system, but not yet old enough to accept it as fixed. The first to file was Officer Caden Ramos, 27. His form contained no vague reasoning, just one line: "I can't continue working in a unit where silence is called professionalism and agreement is used to suppress the weakest voice." 4 more soon followed, 3 colleagues from his shift and 1 from emergency support. They made no public statements, but internally it was clear this wasn't surrender. It was a warning. At the same time, something more unexpected happened at the Northgate Police Academy. Gerald Knox, lead instructor for situational response management, announced his resignation after 16 years of teaching. A former strategic officer who helped build much of the city's behavioral training curriculum, Gerald left, not under pressure, but to launch something new. He called it the Ethics and Justice Lab, located in a small rented building that used to be a library, with space for just 20 students per class. No lectures on takedown technique, no mock weapon drills. Just roundtable sessions centered on one question. When you're unsure who's right in a tense situation, what do you choose to protect? Your teammate, the rules, or the person? Gerald didn't call it a school. He called it a room to retrain how to be human. In the pilot week, nearly half the students were former officers waiting to reimagine their careers. Elsewhere in the city, change was moving in a different, deeper direction. Officer Javier Ortega, the only Latino member of the South Patrol Unit, requested permission to host a community dialogue at St. Jude Church, a shelter long used by unhoused Black residents during winter sweeps. He called the event Listening Backward. Instead of presentations, policy reviews, or arrest reports, Javier made one simple request. Today, officers will sit and listen. No notes, no responses, just stories from people who were pulled over, watched, searched, or doubted just because they looked wrong. Only 7 residents showed up the first time. Most didn't believe it would matter. One elderly woman asked, "And what will you do with what I say?" Javier shook his head. "Nothing today. Today we only listen. And they did. One man shared how his father was stopped for walking at night. A student recalled being searched 3 times in a semester, while none of his white classmates were. A woman said she hadn't dialed 911 in 3 years because the last time she did, the officer asked her, "Are you on any psychiatric meds?" For 2 hours, no one was interrupted. No one was reframed, just silence from the uniforms, learning what it felt like to be heard without holding the floor. At the end, Javier didn't speak. He bowed. But a middle-aged man came forward, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "First time I've seen a cop listen without correcting. I may not trust the system, but today I started to trust a person." On a windy Tuesday morning in the northern edge of Northgate Park, where it all began, a small wooden sign appeared beside a bench. No ribbon, no security, no media or rally, just a knee-high plank with white hand-painted letters, simple like chalk lines. From someone unused to doing this in public. "I used to be a cop. I'm sorry. I'm here to relearn." No one knows who placed it. Cameras were still offline for upgrades. The park staff had no notice. But everyone who passed that morning stopped, not to record, but to read, then stand in silence. Some left flowers beside it. A 6th-grade girl left a drawing of an outstretched hand with a note in pencil. "I don't know who you are, but if you're real, I'm listening." The sign wasn't taken down. No one dared. The park administration simply built a wooden frame around it to protect it from rain, leaving it there as a temporary part of the park, something that might not stay forever, but deserved to remain long enough for others to notice that something had changed. While the quiet shifts in the community continued to ripple outward, another event happened silently in the background. A letter sent to the mayor's office, addressed "For Miss Amira Monroe, personal delivery only." There was no logo, no return address, but the handwriting, stiff, precise, and taut, made it easy to tell this wasn't a child's letter. And not from an outsider either. The letter was first seen by the mayor's administrative assistant, a woman who had worked with Eliza for 6 years. When she read the handwriting, she didn't open it. She placed it on Eliza's desk with a note. "You should be the one to decide if this gets delivered." Eliza opened it after the office had emptied. Only the desk lamp and the soft hum of the ventilation remained. Inside were 3 short paragraphs. "I'm not writing to be forgiven. I'm writing because I can't keep inside what sat in my head these past months. I did wrong, not just because of what I did that day, but because I lived long enough in a system that made me think acting that way was normal. I don't expect the girl to read this, but if she does, I want her to know. I'm no longer a cop, and I'm relearning, starting with naming what I did that day for what it truly was. No signature, but in the bottom corner, a pressure-heavy stroke had left 3 faint uppercase letters, BK. Eliza knew instantly, Banks, not Keller. The next morning, she placed the envelope on Amira's desk without a word. Amira glanced at it, then gently closed the flap and pushed it back toward her mother. "I don't need the letter, Mom." Eliza looked at her, about to ask why, but before she could, Amira answered, not with anger, not with pain, but with a clarity that made even the silence around them still. "I don't need an apology from someone who stayed silent when I needed protection the most. I need that silence not to happen again." Eliza didn't reply. She just nodded, then placed the envelope into a private drawer. Not destroyed, not displayed, because she understood. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about accepting an apology. It's about refusing to let rage become the map. Amira didn't mention it to her friends, didn't post, but the next morning at school she paused beside a classmate who had once been bullied in the bathroom while everyone stayed silent. She said nothing, just sat down next to her during recess, quietly, but in a way that made sure no one mistook silence as safety ever again. On an ordinary Wednesday during homeroom at a middle school in the west side of the city, the homeroom teacher of Class 8B began with a question. If one day you had to explain justice to a younger child, what would you say? No one answered right away. On the whiteboard behind her was a simple prompt. Topic: justice, not a concept but an action. Then a small hand went up. Kinney, the quiet kid who usually sat in the back and had once been disciplined for daydreaming. He asked, not to impress, but with an unexpected sincerity. Justice, is it when the person in power knows how to admit they're wrong and apologize to someone weaker? The teacher nodded gently, but before she could respond further, another voice jumped in. Mira, the outspoken student who usually led class discussions. I don't think that's it. I think justice is when someone weaker still chooses to stand, even when they know they might get pushed down. The class fell silent. Not because someone had won the debate, but because something true had just been said by kids who, just months earlier, only used the word justice when working on group assignments. The teacher didn't correct either answer. She smiled, then wrote both sentences on the board beneath the title. Two definitions, seemingly opposed, but fitting together like two halves of a larger truth. Justice doesn't move from one side. It is motion between the one who is wrong and the one who was hurt. After that lesson, a few students from the school, members of the Student Broadcast Club, decided to rebrand their old podcast into a new project. They called it Justice from the Bench. A simple name, but anyone in Northgate understood the reference. The bench wasn't just a place to sit. It was where Amira once stood, and no one listened. The podcast was led by 3 students from 8th and 9th grade, each taking turns narrating episodes. Each one focused on a different slice of the bigger theme, justice, and the first guest was Amira. They didn't record video, only audio. Amira didn't follow a script. She answered calmly, helping others understand that she wasn't a symbol, but a real person with fear, choices, and quiet resilience. When asked what she would change if she could go back, she said, nothing, explaining that screaming sooner brought help and louder might have brought harm. Her final words, "I didn't walk away from myself," resonated deeply. The podcast, shared widely across schools and families, carried a simple truth. One younger student commented, "If someone like Amira was scared and still stood, maybe I can start from where I'm trembling too." Amira stayed after the recording, talking with friends who helped host the show. When someone asked, "If that were you, what would you want others to do?" the group grew quiet. In that silence, something shifted. A boy said softly, "I'd want someone to stand near me, not film or speak, just stand." A girl added, "I'd want someone to ask if I was okay, so I know I'm not alone." Amira didn't write these down. She nodded, recording them not with ink, but with presence. The episode ended with no summary, only a closing line. Justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It begins when someone asks, quietly, "If that were you, what would you need?" A few days later, during a literature class for 7th graders in a Southern District school, the teacher assigned a writing prompt. Write down what you want others to remember, not about Amira's incident, but about the most important thing you learned from it. The essays were collected in silence, but as she graded, the teacher paused longest at one. No name, no decoration, just one sentence centered on the page. No one remembers the girl who was grabbed by the dress, but everyone remembers that the teacher put down her pen. No corrections, no grade. She folded the page gently, slipped it into an envelope, and set it aside, as if to quietly preserve what was right in a world still learning how to say what's right. Later, when asked why they wrote that, the student simply said, "I didn't know her. I didn't see it happen. But I think she doesn't need someone else to tell her story. She needs people to remember the right part." And that response, never printed in the papers, never quoted in analysis, became the simplest definition of a girl once seen as a victim, who chose instead to become the beginning of a different kind of story, a story that didn't start in humiliation or end in pity, but passed through quiet courage and stayed as something people would carry for a lifetime. Once, there was a child who didn't run, and after that, others began to stop. The following spring, the maple trees in the city's Central Park began to bud, their fresh green spreading along the old stone paths. The scenery seemed unchanged, but the park's name was not. No longer Northgate Central Park, the sign above the iron gates now reads, Monroe Commons. The name hadn't come from the city council or a mayoral decree. Eliza Monroe had never suggested it. She had even opposed the idea in a closed meeting. "Don't name it after me," It belonged to a child first. But the public thought differently. Over 6 months, more than 32,000 signatures were collected from churches, libraries, schools, and street vendors, stating simply, "We want it to be Monroe Commons," not for the mayor, but for the mother who stood her ground, and the child who didn't bow her head. The city council could not deny the weight of such a collective will. When the new sign was installed on a Saturday morning, there was no official ceremony, yet the park was full. No flags, no photos, just a quiet circle of people gathered around a single stone bench, the place where it all began. Beside it now stood a small bronze plaque, no taller than a child's knee, with one simple line engraved deep into the metal. "Here, a child once cried out," and from there, a city began to listen. No mention of Amira, no tribute line, no portrait, but everyone in the city understood the weight of those words. The inscription had not been written by an author or a speechwriter, but quoted from a 7th-grade student's letter to the city's Parks Commission, with a request: "We don't need a statue, we just need the words." At the same time, in City Hall, Eliza Monroe was preparing to leave office after 2 terms without seeking re-election. She held no press conference. She gave no farewell speech. On her final morning, she arrived early, opened the windows to let in sunlight, and carefully packed the last files into a plain cardboard box. When reporters pushed into the briefing room, hoping for a closing statement, Eliza simply stepped to the microphone and said exactly 3 lines. "I used to think the end of a term meant closing a chapter, but now I know some chapters don't need to be continued, just not rewritten wrongly." Then, "No one's building statues for me, but if that scream still echoes, I don't need anything more." There was no applause, no music, but in the silence that followed, no one recalled her past speeches. They only remembered that she had never stepped back, even when it would have been easy to do so, and just like that, she walked away. No motorcade, no farewell escort, just Elliot, the student who once recorded the video, standing at a distance, quietly taking a photo. The photo was simple: a woman stepping out of a red brick building, carrying a box of files, head held high, as if she never needed to be remembered, only needed the truth to remain. Months after Eliza Monroe left office and the park was renamed, Amira received a full scholarship from one of the most prestigious universities on the East Coast, in a program reserved for students who impacted society through personal action. The local press kept it short: "The girl who shook the conscience of justice, now honored with the scholarship of a lifetime." But what surprised everyone more wasn't the scholarship. It was the major that Amira chose. Not law, not politics, but sociology. When an independent journalist asked why she chose that field, Amira didn't answer with sarcasm or dismissal of the law. She said just one sentence, simple but unforgettable: "I don't need to learn how to defend what's right if I don't understand why people are afraid to say it. I want to understand fear before teaching anyone how to rise above it." No one added anything, because from the same girl once forced into silence now came a message so clear: justice doesn't begin in court. It begins in understanding why people stay quiet. The day Amira left the city, there was no farewell ceremony, just a family car leaving the driveway at 5 a.m., no heavy luggage, no press notes, no one knowing exactly where she was headed. But when the car passed Monroe Commons, Amira asked to stop. She stepped out, still wearing the same worn gray hoodie, hair tied up like always. She walked the stone path, took no photos, didn't linger by the bronze plaque, and simply sat down on the old bench, the one that had once echoed a scream loud enough to shift a city. A few minutes later, Eliza arrived. She said nothing. She didn't need to, because in Amira's eyes was no trace of pain, only a quiet knowing that what happened had finally been named for what it was. On the bench, faint carvings left by strangers read, "I heard you. I didn't look away. Next time, I'll speak." Amira read each one, then stood, returned to the car, and took one last look at the park, not as the place where she was hurt, but as the place that once needed someone to scream, and someone did. Weeks later, during a freshman forum at her new university, Amira was invited to speak before hundreds of students. She didn't talk about the law. She didn't recount her past. She read a short note written by a middle school classmate who once wrote to her, "We don't need to remember names, but we must remember. There was once a little girl humiliated in broad daylight, and because she stood still, others no longer have to fear the dark." The room went silent, not out of pity, not awe, but because everyone knew it wasn't just her story. It was the beginning of a new way to tell it, one that doesn't start with the wrong, doesn't end in outrage, but instead closes on what was right, kept because a child chose not to look away. Some things happen in broad daylight and still go unseen. A child was humiliated in the middle of a park in the heart of the city, surrounded by the silence of adults. No one stepped in, no one spoke up, except her. That girl wasn't a hero, she just didn't run. And from that single scream, the whole city was forced to stop, to listen, to look, and to begin to change. We still live in a world where children are taught obedience before they're taught how to be protected. A world where justice often stands with the louder voice, not the one most hurt. And in that world, protecting a child isn't a noble act. It's the bare minimum for any society that dares to call itself decent. If a child can scream into the silence of a broken system, then no adult has the right to say, "There's nothing I can do." You don't need a title to take action. You don't need a nameplate to stop something wrong. You just have to choose not to look away when justice is being torn apart in the shape of a child. We don't need statues. We don't need names etched into bronze. But there are some things we must never forget, like the fact that a little girl was once humiliated in daylight, and because she stood her ground, other children no longer have to grow up in the dark.